Well, we are in this book 7, Canto 2. Yeah, we have seen in the first canto, basically the agony and the ecstasy of Savitri. The agony of the prophecy that Narad gives, that on the 12th, on the last date of the 12th month, Satyavan would die. And the ecstasy, of course, is the time spent with Satyavan. That is the ecstasy of love. And the agony of losing her lover. But then we have discussed quite at length why Savitri comes down to that level of suffering. Because we have seen Savitri till now as a person who has descended from the transcendental consciousness. And we have had also proof of her transcendental consciousness when she faces her father and gives a decision that she will marry only Satyavan, because she recognizes in Satyavan not just a partner of her life, but a partner of all her evolutionary process or evolutionary ascent. That they have been together in all their lives and working for the evolution of mankind. So having found such a partner, there is no other reason, there is no other possibility that she can choose anyone else, although her mother is very disturbed, agonized at with her choice. But after seeing Savitri in that high spiritual mood, we come in Canto 2, titled The Parable of the Search for the Soul, a unique situation where we see Savitri kind of revolting and refusing to work out her mission. So the inner voice has to intervene and guide her and almost convince her. And this revolt, you can see, is really the revolt of the mind. Of course, accompanied with the revolt of the vital. Because as you see in the second page itself, where she says, "Why should I strive with earth's unyielding laws, or stave off death's inevitable hour? What need have I, what need has Satyavan, to avoid the black meshed net, the dismal door, or call a mightier light into life's closed room, a greater law into man's little world?" Well, such is her revolt, but also the inner voice reminds her that she has not taken birth on earth only for the sake of reviving Satyavan or stopping his death. Because her true mission is to bring new world, a greater light upon earth, and to really change the unalterable fate that death brings to all of us. Well, having been convinced, she submits to the voice, the higher voice, the inner voice, and ultimately she says, "Command, for I am here to do thy will." So once she surrenders, then the voice gives her the first guideline. The voice says, "Remember why thou camest. Find out thy soul. Recover thy hid self. In silence seek God's meaning in thy depths. Then mortal nature change to the divine." So this was the advice, and rightly so, because the very first step is to find out thy soul. Because one may have any mission, one may be an avatar or incarnate, but until and unless one contacts one's own soul or psychic being, one cannot fulfill one's mission upon earth, or I would say fulfill one's mission of one's own birth, and then even the avatar cannot fulfill the mission of his own birth on earth. So there are two steps here. Find out thy soul first, recover thy hid self, and then the second one is, in silence seek God's meaning in thy depths. Third step is, then mortal nature change to the divinity. So there is what we see here, a psychicization, that of the soul, discovery of the soul. Then there is spiritualization, where you see the meaning of God in all the creation. And third is what we see, transformation of the outer nature. So the voice advises her like that, and then ultimately says, "Thy voice shall house the mightiness of his word, then shalt thou harbor my force and conquer death." This is, if some of you have not found it, it is on the 1, 2, 3, 4th page, where the first stanza ends, This is almost the last lines of the stanza I am repeating here. "Then Savitri by her doomed husband sat, still rigid in her golden motionless pose, a statue of the fire of the inner sun." Then of course there is a kind of a poetic relief, as we say. Suddenly the scene changes to that of nature. So Sri Aurobindo shifts here and he says, "In the black night the wrath of storm swept by, the thunder crashed above her, the rain hissed, its million footsteps pattered on the roof. Impassive made the movement and the cry, witness of the thoughts of mind, the moods of life. She looked into herself and sought for her soul." So this is the beginning of our journey. This is the line from where we will pick up her sadhana. She looked into herself and sought for her soul. You see, this is the advice that the voice had given her: find out thy soul, recover thy hid self. And here we have a few things to get clarifications. Because here The words that Sri Aurobindo uses are very typical of the process of finding out one's psychic being. The first thing, if you note here, witness of the thoughts of mind. Now, the first thing that she learns or she does, what we were the other day reading from the mother also in her comments on the Dhammapada, there are a couple of steps we need to do before we can go within. The first one, as she observes, is observation itself, where you have got to be a spectator. Observe your own thoughts. That is the first step of becoming, or I would say not even becoming, that's the very first step of disassociating yourself from the mind. Because you see, the funny thing is, we are at all times either thinking or feeling or the body pain or the body's things. But we are identified at all times, at all given moments, with the body or the vital or the mental, and more with the mind. Because you see, even now when we are thinking, you see, for example, you are all here listening to this Savitri, and you are not aware of your body, what is the posture you are taking, what is the dress you are wearing, what is your hairstyle, nothing. You are the mind, you are the thought. So we are not thinking, we are the thought itself. We are identified with so much with our ideas, and I do not think myself somebody separate from my thought or away from my thinking. So we are constantly thinking, I am the thought. I am thinking, what should I do? Where should I go? What should I build? Where should I? So I am a kind of a stream of thought. Or else when you have some emotional pang and problem, you are a stream, a wave, a disturbance of emotions. Or else when you have a body pain and suffering, you are continuously thinking of that this is my body, this is the pain. At that time the thought waves don't disturb you. So what I want to say, what Mother is telling us is, or Sri Aurobindo tells us here, witness the thoughts of the mind. So the very first thing that we need to do in meditation, that's what I am preparing for the coming workshop, is just to learn to observe your own thoughts. So that is the stage of observation. Otherwise, normally we say go deep. But how do you know how to go deep? Because who is it who is going deep? You see, unless we train ourselves to dissociate, to separate my consciousness and the thought, I cannot focus my consciousness. So first thing she says is observe, then be a witness. You are a kind of a judge, a discerning judge, she would say, where you know what is good, what is wrong, what are the thoughts, what are the ideas, what are the feelings that push you towards an unquiet mind and unhappiness, or what are the good things that push you towards your own goal. So there is a stage of observation and witness. And then the third stage is the control of thought. And the last stage is the mastery over thought. So these are the specific 4 steps, consecutive steps, you cannot jump. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you come to this spot, to this point where you can master your thoughts, then you have achieved your concentration. That means you have in your hand the instrument of a flashlight, a torchlight. Then you have really focused the torchlight. Nowadays you have some of these flashlights where you can focus and bring it to a single, almost a single ray. Otherwise the flashlight is a general light. But you can focus it to such an extent that it becomes only a little ray of light. So similarly, these 4 stages of the mind bring you to that level of concentration. And once you reach there, then begins this witness of the thoughts of mind, the moods of life. You see, that's the control of the emotions, the moods of life, the thoughts. And then it says, she looked into herself. Very beautiful. Otherwise, normally the yoga master, they say sit quiet with your eyes closed and then look into yourself. But we cannot look into ourselves because we do not know who are we. That's why we get waylaid by all kinds of thoughts. So here, I've asked myself this question of the process, and more interesting is what follows here. You see, there are say at least 4 to 5 pages of description of Savitri. She closes her eyes, or she looked into herself, and suddenly she is not taken into her soul directly, but she gets into occult worlds, cosmic worlds, something of the past, something of the evolutionary past. So I wanted to ask the question, is it the process or is it typical to Savitri? You see, what we have to learn is it only Savitri's experience? Then I have nothing to do with it. Nothing in the sense, okay, I appreciate, I evaluate and all that, but can it be applicable to me? Can I follow Savitri's yoga? That's the question I had in my mind. And as usual, as I told you many a time, yes, it is answered by Sri Aurobindo, and I was amazed at seeing this. I have here Essay BCL volume 24, and I found a tremendous hint here as to what happens when one begins to look within. So this is on volume 24, (1103). Yeah. Now I'll read out a couple of letters which tell us that what are the experiences that one usually goes through. And what I liked about this whole thing was that these letters that were written by Sri Aurobindo, maybe we do not know which year exactly, I cannot point out here, but these letters tell us that Sri Aurobindo himself had these experiences, and he has now put it in Savitri, but otherwise they are his personal experiences, personal and yet the experiences of integral yoga per se. So that's what is beautiful here. This is on page 1097, 1097, and Sri Aurobindo would tell us No, I'm sorry, page number 1092. Number 1. For the soul, there are 3 realizations. When you start looking for the soul, it goes through 3 stages of realization. Number 1, the realization of the psychic being and consciousness as the divine element in the evolution. Now, those of you who are philosophic minded, you would have noticed something here. It says the first step is the realization of the psychic being and consciousness as the divine element in the evolution. So the very first step when you are in search of the soul is that you are now face to face with your own psychic being. We'll come to that later, I'll discuss that later. Second one, the realization of the cosmic self, which is one in all. And if you see what I was referring to in Savitri, the very next line, the very first line of the next stanza, Sri Aurobindo writes, a dream disclosed to her the cosmic past. You see, it is so close to the experience. One of the first experiences of this journey to the soul is we get the cosmic past. And Sri Aurobindo is referring to here the realization of the cosmic self, which is one in all. The third one is the realization of the supreme divine, from which both individual and cosmos have come, and of the individual being, Jivatma, as an eternal portion of the divine. So, in search of the soul, we should think, remember these 3 steps, because we will try and see if Savitri has found these steps or not. First, the psychic realization, the cosmic self, and then the supreme divine, the transcendental self. That's one letter. There's another letter just below that on the same page. The psychic being stands behind the heart, supporting the mind, life and body. In the psychic transformation, there are 3 main elements. The opening of the occult inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, so that one becomes aware of all that lies behind the surface mind, life and body. And this is exactly what we are going to get in the next canto, the triple soul forces. What is that inner mind, inner vital, inner physical? You see, Sri Aurobindo very meticulously follows almost the steps that you get towards your journey to the soul. I found it extremely interesting because he has almost given us a chart. It is not the old yogis telling us, you get in, you see a light, you see this. But what's wonderful is he gives you the exact steps that one gets in this march. So the first one, the opening of the occult inner mind, etc. The second one, the opening of the psychic being or soul by which it comes forward and governs the mind, life and body, turning all to the divine. What we say, one is governed by the psychic being. First one is, one comes to know the inner being, the inner mind, inner vital. If you remember long back we had done this chart, that once one goes from the outer to the inner, the first layer one comes across is the subliminal being. And the subliminal being is nothing but this inner mind, inner vital, inner psyche, inner physical. So Savitri too, I'm giving you this philosophic background so that when we start looking into the lines, we will recognize and say, yes, this is exactly the experience of what Sri Aurobindo had described. So I'm giving you kind of the roadmap of this journey. So the first one is the psychic being, the subliminal being. The second one is the psychic being begins to govern, means to influence your mind, life and thought. And the third one is the opening of the whole lower being to the spiritual truth. This last may be called the psycho-spiritual part of the chain. So the third level is a transformation of the outer being. These are lots of details, but I'm sure by now you have tuned yourself to Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So it's important to know these details. So I leave it at that. And then I come to the next page, that is page 1097. I'll just read out the letters first, and then if you have time we'll discuss. Otherwise I would like to build a little theory here. What is meant by the psychics coming to the front is simply this. They've all got this question, what does it mean that the psychic comes forward? The psychic ordinarily is deep within. Very few people are aware of their souls. When they speak of their soul, they usually mean the vital plus mental being, or else the false soul of desire. You see, this is something that I can express, that I have seen this being uttered by many people. I mean, people very glibly say, I have found my psychic, I have a psychic contact. But what they mean basically is that the mental and the vital being. Because this is the inner, the subliminal being, the inner vital, inner mental can camouflage the psychic experience. But normally when we see this some kind of a light, some kind of a vibration, some kind of a ananda experience, we immediately say, oh, this is my psychic. Sri Aurobindo is very clear, he says, it's a kind of a melange, a mixture of the vital mental or else the soul of desire. The psychic remains behind and acts only through the mind, vital and physical, wherever it can. For this reason, the psychic being, except where it is very much developed, has only a small and partial, concealed and mixed or diluted influence on the life of most men. By coming forward is meant that it comes from behind the veil, its presence is felt already in the waking daily consciousness, its influence fills, dominates, transforms the mind and vital and their movements, even the physical. One is aware of one's soul, feels the psychic to be one's true being. The mind and the rest begin to be only instruments of the inmost within us. That was one letter, and I go to the next one, is on page 11. Yeah, there's one on 1103, 1103. This is a very important letter, and you will see a reflection of this letter in Savitri later. When the psychic being awakens, you grow conscious of your own soul. You see that the two things, psychic being and growing aware of one's own soul. So that means obviously there is a difference between the psychic and the soul. And then that's what Sri Aurobindo is telling us here, that when he's saying the parable of the search for the soul, not for the psychic being. So there is a difference. So it is beyond the psychic that you will find the soul. So it is not the same as saying, oh, I found my soul and I found my psychic. They are two different things. But the prior experience is a psychic contact. The ultimate experience is the soul contact. So Sri Aurobindo gives us the title, In Search of the Soul. So coming back to this letter, when the psychic being awakens, you grow conscious of your own soul. You know yourself. And you no longer commit the mistake of identifying yourself with the mental or with the vital being. You do not mistake them for the soul. Secondly, when awakened, the psychic being gives true bhakti for God or for the Guru. That bhakti is quite different from mental or vital bhakti. This is something again which he will explain, and I think for us here is of great importance, because as he would explain, that there is something called the mental bhakti. Normally we think bhakti means it is an emotional bhakti, but there is also the mental bhakti, where he says, in the mind one may have admiration or appreciation for the intellectual greatness of the man or guru, but it is merely mental. It does not carry the matter very far. You see, this is something a lot of us do. We have great admiration for Sri Aurobindo, his genius, his thought, his multiple dimension, his multidimensional personality. We have admiration and adoration and appreciation, but all this is only a mental bhakti. It does not carry the matter very far. Of course, there is no harm in having that also, but by itself it does not open the whole of the inner being. It only establishes a mental contact. So a lot of us, by reading the Life Divine, by reading Savitri, by reading any book of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, we first get this mental bhakti. That means admiration, appreciation, adoration, but purely the mental contact. The vital bhakti demands and demands. It imposes its own conditions. It surrenders itself to God, but conditionally. It says to God, you are so great, I worship you, and now satisfy this desire or that ambition. Make me great. Make me a great sadhak, a great yogin. See, that's the vital bhakti. So that's why the mother would tell us, if you want to do yoga, you have no agenda behind it, either for power or greatness or luminosity or attainment, nothing. You have no ambition to become spiritual, no ambition to become psychic, no ambition to become great, no ambition to gain anything. So that would become a vital bhakti. And where was that? I was reading again somewhere where Mother explains that, I don't remember, that we especially, was it from the Mother? I don't know. Somewhere I was reading that in India we have a big tradition of doing pranams. We go to the temple, we do a pranam here, we go to Samadhi, we do a pranam there, we go to the Matra Mandir, we do a pranam. But at all times there is this vital demand. Either the family or the success or the attainment or the welfare or your lottery or something or the other. So this is not really the spiritual bhakti, the psychic bhakti, which demands nothing. So just seeing people doing a lot of pranams in all the street temples, all the big temples, it doesn't take you too far. So she would say, the unillumined mind also surrenders to the truth, but makes its own conditions. It says to the truth, satisfy my judgment and my opinion. It demands the truth to cast itself in the mind's own forms. You see how twisted it can be, that what I am thinking, what I am telling is the truth. And it demands from the divine that I should be proven right. So what Sri Aurobindo is telling us is, how far is this bhakti? The mental, the vital. The vital being also insists on the truth to throw itself into its own movement of force. The vital being pulls at the higher power and pulls at the vital being of the Guru. Both of them, the mental and the vital, have got an arrière-pensée, mental reservation in their surrender. But the psychic being and his bhakti are not like that. Because it is in direct communication with the divinity behind, it is capable of true bhakti. Psychic bhakti does not make any demand, makes no reservation. It is satisfied with its own existence. The psychic being knows how to obey the truth in right way. It gives itself up truly to God or to Guru, and because it can give itself up truly, therefore it can also receive truly. And thirdly, when the psychic being comes to the surface, It feels sad when the mental or vital being is making a fool of itself. That sadness is purity offended. When the mind is playing its own game, or when the vital being is carried away by its own impulses, it is the psychic being which says, I don't want these things. What am I here for after all? I'm here for the truth. I'm not here for these things. Psychic sadness is again different from mental dissatisfaction or vital sadness or physical depression. If the psychic being is strong, it makes itself felt on the mental or the vital being and forces them, compels them to change. But if it is weak, the other parts take advantage of it and use the psychic sadness to their own advantage. In some cases, the psychic being comes up to the surface and upsets the mental or the vital being and throws everything into disorder. But if the mind or the vital being is stronger than the psychic, then it casts only an occasional influence and gradually retires behind. All its cry is in the wilderness, and the mental or vital being goes on in its own round. See, the third one that we have seen, the first one, the second one we have seen is the bhakti. The first one was the awakening of the soul. The second one is bhakti, but not the mental or the vital, but the psychic bhakti. But the third point that you have just seen is the psychic sadness. Is the psychic sadness when the mental and the vital, they take over, they do not listen to the psychic being and they compel it. So if the psychic is strong, then one is lucky, then one can overrule the psychic and the vital and the mental, the vital and the mental, yeah. But otherwise, all its cry is in the wilderness. Lastly, the psychic being refuses to be deceived by appearances. It is not carried away by falsehood. It refuses to be depressed by falsehood, nor does it exaggerate the truth. For example, even if everything around says there is no God, the psychic being refuses to believe in it. It says, I know. And I know because I feel. And because it knows the thing behind, it is not deceived by appearances. It immediately feels the force. Also, when the psychic being is awakened, it throws out all the dross from the emotional being and makes it free from sentimentalism or the lower play of emotionalism. But it does not carry in it the dryness of the mind or the exaggeration of the vital feelings. It gives that just touch to each emotion. One last letter on the same page, 1104. The signs of the psychic's coming forward. A central love, bhakti, surrender, giving everything, a sight within that sees always clearly what is spiritually right or wrong and automatically rejects the latter, a movement of entire consecration and dedication of all in one to the Mother. Well, this is I think I have one more letter here to share with you. Yeah. This is on page 1112. Atma is not the same as psychic. Atma means the soul. The soul is not the same as the psychic. Atma is the self which is one in all, calm, wide, ever at peace, always free. The psychic being is the soul within that experiences life and develops with evolving mind and life and body. The psychic does not suffer like the vital or body. It has not pain or anguish or despair, but it has a psychic sorrow which is different from these things. There is a kind of quiet sweet sadness of yearning which it feels when things go against the divine, when the obscurity and obstacles are too heavy, when the mind, vital and physical, follow after other things, when evil and falsehood and darkness seem to be too strong for the light. It does not despair, but feels that these things ought not to be, and the psychic yearning for it to be otherwise becomes so intense that it is felt as if something akin to sadness. As for the psychic not being in front, that cannot be brought about all at once. The other parts of the being must be prepared for the change, and the veil between must become thinner and thinner. It is for that experiences come, and there is a working on the inner mind and vital and physical as well on the outer nature. Well, that is, I've just read through, but we don't have time to discuss here, but there's one more letter from the mother which I'd like to add here. This is in continuation of what Sri Aurobindo wrote here. You see, we have just talked about the psychic sadness. So, Mother has one very strong and powerful sentence here. This is in the Mother's volume 10, page 279. There is an aphorism by Sri Aurobindo, aphorism number 212. Poets make much of death and external afflictions, but the only tragedies are the soul's failures, and the only epic, man's triumphant ascent towards Godhead. Usually, Mother explains, usually man is not afflicted with the only thing truly tragic, the failure to find one's soul and to live according to its law. This is the only tragedy of life. All the other tragedies do not count in front of that. What is the tragedy? The failure to find one's soul and to live according to its law. In truth, the only thing that is truly tragic is not to become conscious of one's soul, the psychic being, and not to be entirely guided by it in one's life. To die before having found one's soul and lived according to its law, that is the true failure. And the true epic, the true glory is to find the divine in oneself and to live according to His law. And so that is what Sri Aurobindo was explaining about the sorrow of the psychic sorrow, and what the Mother calls here only the true tragedy is not to be able to find one's soul and be entirely guided by it. Then I have one last quotation to tell us, to answer to our question, how to go deeper. That's the last line that I was looking into. She looked into herself and sought for the soul. And it's as if the Mother herself is answering. That's in Mother's volume number 9 and page 310. Of course, she has described it umpteen number of times. But here I have a page which I thought I could share with you. In order to find the soul, you must go in this way, gesture of going deep within, like this. Draw back from the surface, Withdraw deep within and enter, enter, enter. Go down, down, down into a very deep hole, silent, immobile. And there's a kind of something warm, quiet, rich in substance, and very still and very full, like a sweetness. That is the soul. See, yes, the mother tells us here, draw back from the surface. Now, this is the very first step that I was alluding to. How do you draw back from the surface? Means from the senses, from the thoughts, from the emotions. So, because we are continuously living on the surface, and as she would describe elsewhere, that the more you go towards the deeper self, it's vice versa, the more you go away from the senses, their enjoyment, their pleasures, their satisfaction, their desire soul, the deeper you go within. So, it is not the question of being ascetic. It's not that I'm running away from life, that I will go into the mountains and Himalayas. That's not the way to go away from the senses. All the external bridges we have to break. We have to demolish all that attaches us, makes us enjoy, makes us connected, makes us forget ourselves. So, what the yogis have described about the meditation, the bhakti, the karma yoga, if done well, if done in sincerity, I think one of the first things that meditation gives us is this disconnection with the senses. And for that, I think meditation is the strongest weapon. Because even bhakti, you are emotionally out in the outer world. Karma yoga, of course, you are continuously in the outer world. But meditation has this tremendous advantage because you are closing your eyes and then you are trying to move into an observer's position. That means I am not trying to connect myself with the sound or the sight or the color or the taste. You see, when you are meditation, you are not tasting, you are not touching, you are not hearing. Of course, you hear the noise. But if you become that observer of your thoughts and the witness of your thoughts, you will see all the five senses are suspended. Unless somebody bangs a huge noise around you, you don't even hear that. So what she is telling us, draw back from the surface. This is the first step, observation and being witness. And those are what our ancient masters in Sankhya Yoga and Patanjali Yoga, they have stressed. That to be away from the senses, because we are constantly in it, and it is because of this constant sensorial contact that we are not able to go in. So even the mother is telling us, first thing is draw back from the senses. So how do you do that? The 4 steps are given: observation, being a witness, watchful, control and master. So here comes the necessity of meditation. It is not the thing of quietening the mind, getting peace of mind. Integral yoga, we are not bothered about the peace of mind. The peace of mind will automatically come to you if you go into the real peace that is there within. So if we move towards that within, we can get this peace of the mind, the immobility of the emotions automatically. Otherwise, Mother would say people have spent decades and years and of course somewhere, I don't know, my mind is getting confused. I mean, it may take you births together to get the peace of mind, that's kind of a silencing. But she gives us a shortcut. She says, reach that silence within and the rest of the being falls into silence automatically. Otherwise, just trying to stop the thought, trying to do that is an immense job. So when she says, draw back from the surface, withdraw deep within and enter. So once we go away from the surface, I think then we have this experience of going down and down, and a very beautiful description, into a very deep hole. You see, it's an experience I'm sure some of you might have had it sometime or the other. It's kind of, sometimes you see in the Western movies, somebody jumping into the hole and you go infinitely regressing into the hole. We don't know where. So, that regression is there. And sometimes, well, don't think I'm trying to tell you anything personal, but only to give you a kind of a first-hand experience. Long back, it was years back, when I used to go to the playground meditations. Once I experienced this hole, and then what was funny was, I went and hit a consciousness level, I don't know what, where I suddenly experienced a tremendous solidity of the whole body. I'm not only solidity, it's like a huge mountain of a weight. I mean, I could feel my body has become a big rock, a big, mountain of earth. And I could not move. I did not know if I breathed or not. But it was so immensely heavy. Unfortunately, we had, those great stalwarts. So I went and spoke to Nirodha about it. He said, yes, it's a very positive experience, and you have hit upon some kind of a subconscious level where you feel this heaviness of the entirety. So what I want to tell you, yes, there is this depth of the soul, and then you will see that in Savitri too, that there is this entering into the whole, and then you have to go across the subconscious, and then, as we say, at the end of the tunnel is that light. What she says here is a warm, quiet, rich in substance, and very still like a sweetness. And if one is insistent and is conscious oneself, then there comes a kind of plenitude which gives a feeling of something complete that contains unfathomable depths, in which, should one enter, one feels that many secrets would be revealed, like the reflection in very peaceful waters of something that is eternal, and one no longer feels limited by time. One has the feeling of having always been and of being for eternity. That is when one has touched the core of the soul. And if the contact has been conscious and complete enough, it liberates you from the bondage of outer form. You no longer feel that you live only because you have a body. That is usually the ordinary sensation of the being. To be so tied to this outer form that when one thinks of myself, one thinks of the body. That is the usual thing. The personal reality is the body's reality. It is only when one has made an effort for inner development and tried to find something that is a little more stable in one's being that one can begin to feel that this something which is permanently conscious throughout all ages and all change, this something must be myself. But that already requires a study that is rather deep. Otherwise, if you think, I'm going to do this, I need that, it's always your body. A small kind of will which is mixture of sensations, of more or less confused sentimental reactions, and still more confused thoughts, which form a mixture and are animated by an impulse, an attraction, a desire, some sort of a will, and all that momentarily becomes myself, but not directly, for one does not conceive this myself as independent of the head, the trunk, the arms, the legs, and all that moves. It is very closely linked. It is only after having thought much, seen much, studied much, observed much, that you begin to realize that the one is more or less independent of the other, and that the will behind can make it either act or not act. And you begin not to be completely identified with the movement, the action, the realization that something is floating. But you have to observe much to see that. And then you must observe much more still to see that this, the second thing that is there, that this kind of active conscious will is set in motion by something else, which watches, judges, decides, and tries to found its decisions on knowledge. That happens even much later. And so, when you begin to see this something else, you begin to see that it has the power to set in motion the second thing, which is an active will. And not only that, but that it has a very direct and very important action on the reactions, the feelings, the sensations, and that finally it can have control over all the movements of the being. This part which watches, observes, judges, and decides. That is the beginning of control. When one becomes conscious of that, one has seized the thread, and when one speaks of control, one can know, yes, this is what has the power of control. This is how one learns to look at oneself. Well, yes, this has been a bit of a long passage, but I have purposely brought this and read out all this because this is exactly the process that Savitri herself follows. I mean, this kind of a going away from the surface, disconnecting with the sensations, and of course, because she is already disciplined into this kind of a inward look, if I can say, what Sri Aurobindo has told us, she can really very fast go into her subliminal, and then she gets the knowledge of the subliminal self, and what Sri Aurobindo has described, the knowledge of the cosmic self. So, what was amazing was to discover that all that the Mother and Sri Aurobindo have spoken in their letters, in their classes, in their explanations, are really found in Savitri's own journey to her soul. So it is not something, of course I cannot use the word imagine, Sri Aurobindo never imagined that thing is a reality. But what's important is that this seems to be the general process of integral yoga. So when we say the word integral yoga and the process of finding the soul, of finding your psychic being, now we have guidelines what to look for. It is not something I'm looking for some strange experiences of this and that, and then you get carried away with saying, oh, I've got great experiences. No. You can get carried away. But now in what Mother has said and what we are going to take up in detail of this Savitri's process is going to be the guideline for the psychic realization in integral yoga. So that's why this chapter is of extreme importance. And please do read the references that I've given, and because it will be good to remember the steps when we get into this description. Otherwise we get lost, because I try to really, and I endeavor to find out the inner running line. Otherwise there are beautiful images, beautiful question of cosmic self, about the evolution of mind, matter, life. So you do not know what is happening. We thought that we are going to go into the search of the soul, and suddenly Sri Aurobindo speaks of the evolution of the mind, what mind does, what life has done, what matter has done. So we get kind of lost in this journey. But once I read Sri Aurobindo, now I know that this is part of the journey. But this is where I think the real search begins, and we will resume this search, I'm afraid, only next year, because unfortunately I'm having to go out of station on the 25th of this month. But I could have taken 2 classes before 17th and 24th, but both happen to be darshan days. 17th is a Monday and 24th is a Monday. And we are having a kind of a workshop between 18th and 23rd on meditation and concentration, its process and purpose. So I'll be a little bit engaged with what all I've been speaking now and concentrate on this because I'm trying myself to see what are the practical ways, what are the steps, what is the what we call the roadmap of meditation. And luckily now that I'm trying to give a workshop, I find this chapter on the search for the soul, and Shoaib and the mother also are telling us the same thing. So I'm afraid I'll be a bit busy for 17th and 24th. And 25th I'm going out of station to be back for a couple of days and then going to Hyderabad. So until 15th I will not be back home. And even after that, on the 18th, we are proposing to have some seminar with Pondicherry University, and then 26th to 31st of December we'll be having again a workshop on Savitri. But the special theme is dialogue between Savitri and death. That would be conducted half day by Alok Pandey, dialogue between Savitri and death. And the second part of the day, it would be mostly by me. And I do not know what exactly would be my theme, or there would be different topics from Savitri. I have not yet decided, but those 5 days would be purely on Savitri, 26th, 31st of December. And so, all said and done, I feel it's only in the first week of January that we will be resuming the classes here. So, well, sometimes I have to go out, but I hope that this does not disturb our rhythm and our intensity of this search for the soul. We will see what happens. So now we will have a bit of concentration and before we leave.